Thank you, members of Synod. Would you give your attention to the moderator, please?
Thank you, members of Synod. It has just ticked over 7 o'clock, and so ballot 2 is now closed. I'm pleased tonight to be able to welcome Reverend Sharon Hollis, the President, and Colleen Guy, General Secretary of the National Assembly. As I mentioned yesterday, this will be the last time that we welcome the two of them in these roles to this assembly. So, to whatever this is, yes. All right, to this synod. So, thank you, Sharon and Colleen. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Moderator. I'm Sharon Hollis. I'm the Assembly President. I live on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. The General Secretary and I are delighted to bring the Assembly report to this, your Synod meeting. I want to begin by acknowledging the sovereign First Peoples of the lands and waters on which we are meeting today, and I pay my respects to the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people as the sovereign owners of this land. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all descendants for the care they have taken of this land, their culture and their spirituality since creation. I also want to acknowledge the commitment the Uniting Church has to the covenant with the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, and to our attempt to allow that to shape our lives in all we do and all we think and pray about. I acknowledge all First Peoples who are here today. If I could have our presentation now, that would be splendid. This is the last time, as the moderator said, that the General Secretary and I will be together at a synod. I have one more synod to go as President next year, which I'm looking forward to in the Northern Synod, but the General Secretary is finishing at the end of December. Nearly 70 people joined the President's Conference for over 4 days at Redcliffe Uniting Church. We were enriched by presentations from the Reverend Dr. Rachel Mann, who's a priest in the United Kingdom, and by Uniting Church ministers and scholars, the Reverend Dr. Kathy Lambert and the Reverend Dr. Sally Douglas, along with Brooke Prentice, and many panels and times for reflection and conversation. Ministry agents gathered to think about ministry in precarious times, while a whole church gathering learnt about the breadth of mission and discipleship across the Uniting Church, and thought together about being salt in the world and how that shapes our lives as communities of faith.
Moderator, General Secretary and members of Synod, it is wonderful to be here, and it's nice to be at Victas Synod as my last Synod. I am the Assembly General Secretary, Colleen Guy, and I live on the lands of the Turrbal people. Today I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people and pay my deep respects to their elders past and present, and to their descendants. The Assembly Resourcing Unit Ministry and Mission is a unit within the Assembly, and the team supports a range of activities and projects. For example, the national conferences of our church are supported by this team. I was delighted to hear the discussion this morning on Proposal 10, Zero Emissions, which mentioned the resolution made at the reconvened Assembly meeting last year. I want to let you know that the Assembly Standing Committee has established the Net Zero Emissions Working Group. The working group is currently gathering data on commitments that have been made right across the life of the Uniting Church. There has been a national online roundtable to begin the process, and a survey was distributed to all congregations in October. Please respond and let us know what is happening in your community. What is happening in synods, presbyteries and congregations is vital to the work we do together to respond to the crisis that is happening in our planet. Our goal as a national church is to have a national commitment from our church to a shared target. Recently, the Being an Intergenerational Church framework was developed by the team and launched, and if this is an interest to you, you can find this on the Assembly website, uniting.church. The 16th Assembly agreed to ask the Church to consider adding some additional documents to its continuing witness as set out in the Basis of Union. 3 documents from recent and contemporary contexts are being considered this triennium, and we are being asked whether they could challenge, renew, and strengthen the faith of our church. The continuing witness work invites presbyteries and members and congregations to consider 3 documents: the 1986 Confession of Belhar from South Africa, Laudate Si, the 2015 encyclical of Pope Francis, and the 1999 Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, the product of Lutheran Roman Catholic dialogue. You can participate in a consultation right now in this by using the resources available on the Assembly website. Also, at this Synod, you are extremely lucky because Rachel Kronberger and Jeff Thompson, members of the task group, are part of your Synod and would love to talk to you about how your presbytery or congregation can be involved in this work. The Ministry and Mission team was delighted to welcome some new members recently. Raul Suganananthan was appointed as the Policy and Advocacy Officer, and at the beginning of this month, Kath Bien and Sunny Chen began as national consultants. We're grateful to this Synod for Sunny, and we're looking forward to all that they will bring to the work of the Assembly.
At its meeting in March this year, the Assembly Standing Committee agreed, after hearing from United Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, and informed by our commitment to the covenant between Uniting Church and Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, to advocate in support of the voice to Parliament. I think it's been amongst the most significant advocacy work that the Assembly has done, and despite the fact that the position we advocated for was not successful, we continue to remain committed to exploring what it means to be engaged in advocacy with and alongside members of Congress. For me, one of the most important parts of the resolution that we passed in relation to supporting the voice was to invite the whole Uniting Church to see the referendum as a challenge to reflect further on our own practices in our relationships with First Peoples within and outside the Church, in expressing the priority of the covenant with the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress. That work remains before us as unfinished business. We must continue to allow the challenge of the voice and the referendum, the witness of Congress, and the varied life circumstances and situations of Indigenous people around Australia to shape and guide how we work as a church and the ministry that we engage in. The Uniting Church is a member of quite a large number of global ecumenical communities: the World Council of Churches, the Global Christian Forum, the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the Pacific Conference of Churches, the Christian Conference of Asia, the World Methodist Council, as well as the National Council of Churches in Australia. All of these memberships are financially resourced and supported by the Assembly on behalf of the whole Church. Our membership makes us quite unique in some ways. We're one of only 6 churches who are members of both the World Council of Churches and the Global Christian Forum. We're one of only 2 churches that holds membership of both the Christian Conference of Asia and the Pacific Conference of Churches. The World Council of Churches General Assembly met in Germany last year. The General Secretary and I were delegates for the Uniting Church, and the Reverend Mark Kickett attended as an advisor for us. I was privileged to be elected to the World Council of Churches Central Committee, which is the main governance body for the World Council of Churches between its General Assembly meetings, which only happen every 8 years. Imagine that, moderator, a meeting every 8 years. As the moderator pointed out when he spoke about the situation in Gaza and Israel, one of the great gifts of our global ecumenical memberships is the capacity to receive verifiable information from people in ministry on the ground about situations around the globe that cause us both deep sorrow and deep joy. The policy making of the World Council of Churches, its staff and its executive and central committees gives us capacity to speak into those spaces with authority, confident both of the position we hold and of the research and fact-finding that goes into holding those positions. The Christian Conference of Asia met recently in India, where Joy Han, who has been here at least for some of the meeting, was a delegate, and Alison Overeen attended. And the Pacific Conference of Churches is meeting right now in Kanaki, and it's a sign of my deep love for all of you that I'm here and not there. I know, it's pretty nice of me. Sorry, and I was so excited to be here, I lost my spot. Many Uniting Church members are involved in ecumenical work with these international bodies in local ecumenical efforts and in dialogues both here and internationally. I also want to pay tribute to the number of people, particularly in this synod, who resource the Uniting Church Lutheran dialogue that happens nationally in Australia. This continues the commitment our church has had since it began, when in the basis of union we gratefully acknowledge memberships of ecumenical bodies and committed to maintain those memberships, as we seek to learn from the witness of other churches and be strengthened by their fellowship.
The Assembly has 3 agencies: Frontier Services, Uniting Care Australia and Uniting World, who continue to do their work and make a difference. Uniting Care Australia is the Church's national body for our community services. Involved in advocacy and support, this year it celebrates its 30-year anniversary. It works across our community services network and connects experts in communities of practice, also advocating for the work of our services and those they support with the federal government. Frontier Services continue to meet the needs of those living in remote Australia through the pastoral care and community engagement of its bush chaplains and through the volunteer program of Outback Links. Frontier Services bush chaplains work in some of the remotest areas in this country, walking alongside people in those communities. Frontier Services raises funds to support this important work and connects with presbyteries and synods where the placements of bush chaplains sit. I'd like to give a great shout out to the 3 amazing bush chaplains in this synod, Marion Bissett, Veronica Bradley and Peter Harvey. Please, if you haven't sat with them and heard the stories about their work, do it at this synod. Uniting World is the aid and development agency of the Assembly and significantly supports our church partnership relationships, particularly in Asia and the Pacific. Working with our partners, Uniting World provides important programs in areas such as gender equality, climate justice and disaster chaplaincy. Their reach is wide, and they bring us the stories of people and communities they work in partnership with. Our life as a uniting church is enriched by our church partners. If you'd like to know more about Frontier Services and Uniting World, please visit their stalls in the lower hall. I'd also like to acknowledge our Defence Force chaplains, as they are engaged in important work, walking alongside members of the Defence Forces, providing pastoral care and support. Yesterday, you heard the Act 2 report about the Act 2 project and the important report Act 2 in response to God's call. Many of you have contributed or made a submission or written a paper relating to the work on theological culture. We are also grateful for the wisdom you shared in the working groups yesterday as part of the collective discernment phase of the project. As Andrew said yesterday, we also invite you to be part of the prayer gathering on the 30th of November as we conclude this current phase. As the project continues, we are hopeful and wait as God's Spirit comes to us as we discern together God's will for the future of the uniting church.
Next year, from the 11th to the 16th of July, the 17th Assembly will meet in Parramatta in the New South Wales ACT Synod to hear about the work of the Assembly since the online and reconvened meetings of the 16th Assembly, and to make important decisions, as we always do at Assemblies, about the national work and responsibilities of our church. We look forward to welcoming members from the VicTas Synod to this Assembly once you've elected them. I would like to take this opportunity to express our thankfulness to the members of this Synod who are serving the Assembly in this triennium, particularly those who serve on Assembly Standing Committee. So I say thank you to the moderator, to Alison Overeem, Ayla Williams, Jeff Thompson, Sandy Boyce, Mick Dobson and Nicole Mugford, all of whom serve in that way. Thank you. The theme I chose for the Assembly meeting that I presided over was dwelling in love, and one of the great privileges of the role of President and of General Secretary is that we get to see the myriad ways in which the Church across the nation, and indeed across the globe, seeks to try and live as a loving presence in the world, dwelling with our neighbours, seeking to be compassionate, to share the gospel faithfully, and to be witnesses to the life and hope we know in Jesus Christ. This ministry that all of you participate in and we get to witness at a national and global level is a deep privilege, and we thank you for this opportunity to serve the Church nationally. We pray for you, your Synod, as we do for every Synod. We ask for blessings on your work. May you find joy and hope, peace and contentment in the work of this Synod. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Sharon and Colleen. We have some time for questions or comments to the report, so if you would like to raise a question, please wave a yellow card around and head for a microphone. Thank you.
Moderator, Robert Stringer from Yarra Yarra Presbytery. I have a question that deeply troubles me because of my relationship with the West Papuan community here in Melbourne. This is where most of the members of the canoe that came down some 12 years ago reside, and I end up being a sort of chaplain to that community. I have visited West Papua twice, but I'm deeply concerned that our church finds it very hard to keep us informed as to what is really happening. I know that the church has moved from being part of the Indonesian Conference of Churches to having their own Conference of Churches in West Papua, and has now joined the Pacific Conference of Churches. So I'm just wondering what the church is doing, because there's 40,000 troops in West Papua and there's people dying every day.
So part of what's difficult about West Papua is getting validated and reliable information. We know some of what's happening, but not all of it. Through National Update, when we get updates from reliable human rights or church-based communities, we share that through National Update. So we have shared particularly some World Council of Churches updates that have come out. And the World Council of Churches at its General Assembly did pass a resolution around West Papua, and at the Assembly Standing Committee that followed that, we have committed myself, along with the Chair of Congress and Uniting World to engage in advocacy about West Papua. We've met with the Indonesian ambassador and we've met with some Indonesian ministers when they've been in Australia, and we continue to correspond with them about West Papua and about what's happening in West Papua. So we are trying our best with the limited resources we've got and the tricky information that's there. We've also, when we passed our resolution, wrote to the Foreign Minister outlining our concerns about West Papua. One of the key agenda items at the Pacific Conference of Churches that's meeting now is sovereignty. And so that's precisely why they're meeting in Kanaki, which is a French colony, and they are particularly concerned about sovereignty in Australia for First Nations people, sovereignty in the two colonies, French colonies, and sovereignty for West Papua. So there is action happening, and you might have noticed that last year we shared information about boycotting Indonesian goods that the Pacific Conference of Churches asked us to do. So we're sharing what we can when we can, and we're engaged in advocacy when we deem it to be possible to have some positive effect.
If there are no more questions, then let us pray for the President and the Assembly General Secretary and the work of the Assembly. Let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for Sharon and Colleen and for all of the work and service that they offer on our behalf across the Assembly. We pray for them in the work that they are engaged in now and in time for the work that is to come. We pray, gracious God, for the breadth of the work of the Assembly, for its consultants, the agencies, and all of the responsibilities across the Assembly and the Assembly Standing Committee. We pray for the community that is the Uniting Church across Australia. We ask your blessing, guidance, and wisdom that we may love and serve well in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause as they leave the stage. And we will return to the business of the reducing the harm of prohibited drugs towards a health-based approach, the proposal number 8. So those who were on stage previously, if you could return to the stage, please. We had got to the point of making some introductions, and so what we will do now is turn to some questions of clarification, just clarification, around the proposal. And then I'll invite you to spend a little time in table groups talking about how you respond to these issues. So let's start with questions of clarification for this proposal. If you have a question for clarification, could you please move to the microphones? And that's not a lot of questions for clarification, that's fine. No, that's a yellow shirt. That's a yellow card. So we'll engage in further discussion in due course, but clarification questions will be very good. So at this microphone.
Thank you, Moderator. Steve Singline, Wadawurrung Country Presbytery of Port Phillip West. Firstly, I'd like to commend the report, and I think it's a really brave and progressive step for the Uniting Church to be exploring in a safe space, so thank you. The clarification question I have is, in the scope of the work that's been undertaken, has consideration been given to the pill testing regime, and if commentary can be made in relation to that, and if possible, consideration for pill testing as a harm minimisation strategy be included in the proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you. Certainly, I wholeheartedly support pill testing and the expansion and extension of pill testing across Victoria, Tasmania and nationwide. However, I see pill testing as being one of the essential harm minimisation tools or actions we can take, which would be as a result of a change to policy. So I do support it, however, primarily we're looking to advocate for governments to change policy in how we treat people using alcohol and other drugs. And pill testing is one of those things that I would hope would naturally cascade down as policy changes as being something that is far more widely accepted.
Thank you. This microphone.
Ross Roberts, Yarra Yarra Presbytery. I live and work on, retire on Wurundjeri land. My question is just for a bit of clarification. You say no charges if people have small amounts of drugs. That's fine. What happens if someone drives a motor vehicle or something and they are subsequently found to have drugs in the system? What happens to them? They still get charged under the law or what?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a really, I think, a very important question. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. If somebody is under the influence of a substance and causes an accident, then this becomes it's a police matter and a legal matter. So yes, the short answer to that is, I would think that is the case.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. All right, and one more.
Thank you, Moderator. Craig Thompson, Yarra Yarra Presbytery on the lands of the Wurundjeri. My question relates to sections C and D of the proposal, which have to do with supporting and advocating for the decriminalisation. My question is, who does that advocating and so forth, and by what instrument? That is, which part of the church is expressing that advocacy? Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair.
If I may, Moderator, Alistair McRae, Uniting Vic Tas. I live on Wurundjeri country. As this is hopefully a resolution of the Synod, it would be the Synod who makes this advocacy. Uniting Vic Tas, of course, continually lobbies government in all our areas of work and lobbies for best practice. So I assume Adrian and his team would continue. Do you want to add to that?
I think everything you said, Alistair, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity for collaboration between Uniting Vic Tas and the Church in working on this together to determine the best way forward.
Thank you, Duncan. And then I'm hopeful that we're getting close to the end of clarification because I don't want us to slide too far into discussion.
Duncan McLeod, Executive Officer, Elm. So yes, it's great to have collaboration within the Uniting Church Vic Tas, but do we have other friends, other allies or people who we could be working with on a community organising framework to make some progress with this proposal?
I think that's moving towards the discussion part. So can I suggest that we move into table group time now, and let's have 5 minutes of discussion on your table groups as to how you're responding to this and what sort of questions or further questions you might want to raise.
I was just saying. So they said, this comes up. Stay off and lose tomorrow. I'll be back here tomorrow. Oh, we now. So sweet. Yeah.
Members of Synod, if I could draw your attention back together. Sounds like there's some reasonable discussion going on, which is excellent. So I wonder if people would like to bring some questions or comments that will help to shape our conversation as we move forward. So things that you might have discussed in your table group, I would be happy to start to hear some further questions or comments. So if you would like to contribute at this point, then you could move to a microphone. President.
Sharon Hollis, President. I'm on table 22, and one of the questions at our table was, two questions were around if you decriminalise small personal use of drugs, does it encourage people to become drug users? And what would be the impact both on the prison, people going to prison and people leaving prison? They're the two questions from our table, or three.
Thank you for the question. Adrian?
Thank you. These are very common questions that come up in our community and they're great to ask. Around decriminalisation of small amounts promoting drug use, we found from evidence from other jurisdictions, both globally and also within Australia, from South Australia, that decriminalisation does not increase drug use. Decriminalisation of small amounts does not increase drug use. What we did find I wasn't involved, but what they did find in Portugal was that initially, and as I said this morning, it was 22 years ago, initially there was a small spike in youth, in young people using some substances. After a matter of months, that reduced to lower than pre-decriminalisation levels because it was no longer considered rebellious. So there's actually less use of younger people. Now, the second question, I've actually forgotten the second question. Yes, the question around the involvement with the criminal justice or the prison system is an interesting one. Australia has one of the highest rates of recidivism in the world. And one of the reasons for that, and we know from the evidence, is that drug-related crimes, when added on to somebody's other criminal events that they've carried out in their life, top them over into a point where they're being readmitted or reoffending and ending up back in prison. So we know that the reduction with decriminalising substances, some of those, what should be just a civil fine, some of those legal fines are what's tipping somebody over the edge and being sent back into prison. So we know that decriminalisation will reduce some of that recidivism because that cap will be reduced somewhat. Okay.
Thank you. At this microphone.
Moderator Robin Yang, Presbytery at Port Phillip East, from the Bunurong, living on the Bunurong country. After a conversation with my table group, they've encouraged me to stand up. I, as a general thrust, support this drug health-based approach. However, I am struggling with Part D, which is the support of and advocacy of decriminalisation of possession and personal use of small amounts of illicit drugs. For me personally, I've seen the devastating effects of addiction and personally struggle to approve or support the legal use of drugs. Second, I struggle that there is no scale. We have to recognise that there is scales of addiction depending upon the drug. So for example, weed, marijuana versus ice, there's a very big difference, and yet there doesn't seem to be any indication of acknowledging of that, and just I hear it's almost whatever drug is legal for personal use. And finally, I was having a conversation with another colleague who talked about legalisation of drugs in Europe, and my colleague had mentioned that the focus should not be on the drug, but should be on the person, about the rehabilitation of a person. And as I was having a conversation with that, my thought went immediately to America and to the firearms, and isn't that the same kind of argument, that it's not the firearm, it's the people who use the firearms that is the issue? And whether that is an appropriate reflectant point in this conversation. I got the red light, thank you.
Thank you. Can I comment that it's helpful to see cards when at the end of people's comments? So if you have responses, it helps me to know how things are progressing if we see some cards. Thank you. Adrian?
Thank you for your questions. To help answer the question, I'll refer to the recent statement that was put out by the AMA around legalisation versus decriminalisation of substances. And the AMA's statement is entirely in step with what we're proposing, in that decriminalisation without additional treatment, without money put into treating people with substance use problems, will not be effective. So we're simply not asking just for decriminalisation without additional support. We must have decriminalisation aligned with additional resources put into treatment. We also know that decriminalisation reduces the stigma around drug use, and it is far more likely that people will come and seek help, and that's the human part, that's the part that you're talking about. It's the person that we need to treat. It's the person that we're not able to treat in many, many cases because of the stigma and because of the fear of being arrested for coming forward. I hope that helps the question.
Thank you. At this microphone.
Thank you, Moderator. Kathy Halliwell, I live on Gunno-Kurno lands. I fully understand the need to support and help people in addiction. Most of the proposal I'm wholeheartedly in support of. However, I think we need to consider the unintended consequences of something like this. I have an issue, like the previous speaker, with Clause D, and the second part of Cause C, because I have personal experience and interaction in my community on a daily basis. For those of you not familiar with the Latrobe Valley, we have one of the high, I'm not a stats person, but if you walk on the streets, we have one of the highest drug and alcohol problems, especially within youth in the country. Our young people are struggling, and as a personal story, since the decriminalisation of public drunkenness, our children who are from prep to year 12 cannot now go to the bus stop safely, because in the past there was an unofficial relationship where the police would drive past the bus stop. Those engaging in antisocial behaviours would walk away for 10 minutes, allow the children to get on and off the buses and then return once the children had left. That is now not the case. The police do not do their drive-by. I had to watch 5 and 6-year-olds have to walk the gamut of people that were drunk, that have deep psychological reasons for their addictions, and I know there's lots of issues there, but I worry about the places like my community that if it was decriminalised, there are places children would not be safe, and that would be majority of in my area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very familiar with the Latrobe Valley. We run a youth residential rehabilitation program in the Latrobe Valley, so thank you. That's very close to my heart, actually, that area. Decriminalisation, there is no evidence from local Australian jurisdictions and from overseas that decriminalisation increases the prevalence of drug use in our community. People are using drugs in our community right now, and people are dying from overdoses who are dying because they're not able to get support, or they're not reaching out to get enough support. So there's no evidence that decriminalisation will mean that there will be more people using substances in our community. Thank you.
I'm going to just make it, thank you. Oh, sorry, had you finished that comment?
Yes.
Yep. I would like to comment that we will actually spend some time in working groups on this proposal tomorrow. It's clear that there are a range of views for us to work through. So we're going to be spending some time on working groups. I'd still like the people who are at the microphone to have the opportunity to speak and some response there. But that might be as far as we take it tonight, and then allow more discussion in working groups. So we'll go for this microphone. Thank you.
Moderator, I'm Chris Phillips. I live on Wurundjeri country and I'm part of the Presbytery of Yarra Yarra, and my pronouns are they, them. Outside of my Uniting Church experience, I work as a doctor. I've seen drug use affect people in pretty much every context of life. But the problems associated with drug use fall increasingly on the marginalised and especially on the First Peoples of this country. I have been in many settings where I have seen people try to stop people using drugs, and there is no way that you can stop people using drugs. It does not matter if you are in a prison. It does not matter if you are in a secure area of a mental health unit. People will find a way to use drugs because that becomes your drive when you are living with a substance use disorder. If that is the case, then I wonder, what is the point of criminalising drug use? Why can we not say these people need help and they need support, and sending them to prison is not going to help that? We need to be able to be there when people are ready to stop using drugs, and we need to support them as much as they can. And unless we stop people going to jail and ending up in a cycle of marginalisation and homelessness and
keep
despair,
cards down until the end, please.
And until despair, it's not going to change, and people will die because of this. I have a lot of sympathy for people who are have experiences of drug use around them. I'm one of those people. I have that experience within my family, but I know the main thing I can do to help is keep people safe, keep people alive, and that means not sending them to prison.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. Ayla Williams, Country of the Milanina people. I'd just like to echo what Chris has said, pretty much. I wholeheartedly support this proposal. In our table group, we had a very thorough discussion on, we often look at what's wrong with an addiction, but we never take a moment to actually ask what is right with it for that person that's actually experiencing it every day. I genuinely don't believe that anybody wakes up and thinks, oh, that's the sort of path that I want to be on every single day. It's rooted in trauma and it's a health issue. So yeah, I think it's a great proposal and it's progressive and we need more of it. It's not black and white. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Members of Synod, I would just like to test, this is not for decision, but I would just like to test if we were to put the proposal as a whole, and I'm only testing it as a whole at this point, if we were to put the proposal as a whole, how would you respond? Okay. There's quite a bit of blue, and so I'm not going to try to push anything through. I want to make sure that we are all heard properly. I'll remind you that this, like many other major social issues that we work through, people of goodwill have different approaches, and we need to hear and listen well, and make sure that we are discerning the Spirit's calling for us as we work our way through. So as we take this proposal into working groups, then can I please remind you, please keep those working groups and plenary as a safe space so that we can hear people out and try to discern together what is the best way for us responding to God's call as a synod. So thank you. We'll bring that proposal to a close for now, and we'll move to other business. So yes, you can leave the stage. That's fine. So we'll turn our attention back to the zero emissions proposal, which is number 10. And we might not finish this now, but we'll progress it a bit further. We might be able to finish it, we'll see. But I want to start with, we had some comments from Rosalie, and I've invited Mark to make a response to those comments, and we had Christina Roundtree at the microphone, so we'll come to her after Mark's response. So, zero emissions proposal, Mark, thank you.
So just in response to the issues that Rosalie raised, and I have had a chat to Rosalie in the break, just to clarify, the proposal itself does not require any part of the Synod to take action if they do not wish to do so. The task force did actually have a discussion around whether there should be coercive measures, and we quickly agreed that that is not the way we would proceed or seek to proceed with this as a church. We very much work in collaboration and cooperation, and that is on the basis on which we would move towards addressing climate change and taking action. So it'll be up to individual parts of the church to decide to take action. The fund itself is there to facilitate that. You will notice that clause D2 actually allows the task force to assist to assist congregations and presbyteries to actually make applications to the fund and to assist them in identifying ways they could reduce their emissions. So it actually provides a mechanism for assistance in taking that action. I think the issues around looking at, as we take action on reducing climate change, what are the longer term impacts, what products might buy that might need then later disposal, they will be factors that need to be considered into when initiatives are funded to reduce emissions, they will certainly be taken into account overall, and that is pointed to within clause D4 around the other matters that Task Force needs to take into account when considering applying grants through the fund. Finally, on point E, the measurement of the Synod's emissions, I would point out, as I said, the estimated cost of a measurement will probably be $50,000. The bulk of that cost would relate to congregations, and that may be something that needs to be thought through because congregational emissions we estimate are probably about 5,000 tonnes compared out of the overall 20,000 tonnes that we estimate. So it's actually just the sheer number of congregations that will need to be contacted and information collected, which largely will be gas and electricity bills, that will create the bulk of the work, whereas the work to get the emissions from Uniting Age Well and Synod operations is actually much lower because there's a much smaller number of sites and the structures make that collection of information much easier.
Thank you. Microphone. Yes, go ahead.
Moderator, Christina Roundtree, living and working on Wurundjeri country, Presbytery of Yarra Yarra. My pronouns she, her. I want to support the proposal, and yet there's just one or two things, maybe points of clarification that I'd like to ask for response. Our discussions this morning focused primarily on energy generation for light and power, gas and electricity that might be used in buildings. And I note that the proposal really focuses our thinking around scopes 1 and scope 2 emissions. As I return to the zero emissions discussion paper that we were all invited to contribute to over the year, and thank everyone who had a part in that, including the presbytery consultations and congregational discussions, for all that good consultative work. But I guess what I'm missing is any sense of the scope 3 emissions for travel, including flights, but also vehicular travel and the emissions. I think there's a sentence in the report that explains that the scope 3 emissions are actually the bulk of our climate impact. So could you please explain whether the proposal is really basically setting up the funding for creating opportunities for congregations to apply for support in buying solar panels or whatever to reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions, and what is proposed for looking towards attending to scope 3 emissions? Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
To respond to that question, so in our consultation there was very little support to include scope 3, and the Assembly resolution from the middle of last year did not make clear which scope emission should actually be included, which is why we needed to ask the question about which scope of emission should be included. We actually would not take the view that scope 3 emissions would outweigh other emissions. In actual fact, I think our scope 1, 2 emissions would be much larger than our scope 3. The challenge we would have, scope 3 emissions are very difficult to measure. So if you include scope 3, you then get into discussions around, for example, all the emissions related to everybody driving to a church on Sunday in their personal vehicles would form part of our scope 3 emissions. Right, so you would then need to do a survey to find out every vehicle that every member of a congregation is using to drive to church and try and figure out all of those. You can start to see the challenge around trying to include your scope 3 emissions, and otherwise you probably would need to just engage in some sort of estimation exercise, which then creates a whole lot of questions about, what are we really trying to achieve by doing that. There's also with scope 3 the risk of double counting, because effectively it includes also emissions in things that you buy. So if we buy, say, your congregation happens to buy a new photocopier, there will be emissions attached to the production of that photocopier. Your scope 3 would need to figure out what the emissions are attached to that photocopier, but the manufacturer of the photocopier should be addressing that through their scope 1 and 2, so you kind of end up with a double ownership of those emissions, which is why we thought scope 3 is quite difficult. It's difficult to measure, it would be costly to measure, and you end up with the possibility of double responsibility for it. I know the corporate sector has been pushed to address it. I actually think if we could get our scope 1 and 2 addressed, then that would open us up to look at scope 3 possibly down the track. My understanding is parts of the Synod are already starting to look at our vehicle emissions and our air travel emissions as part of our response. And again, they would only form a small part of the overall 20,000 tonnes that we estimated. So when we spoke to the consultant, overwhelmingly it's our gas and electricity usage and some refrigeration were identified as the main sources of emissions across our Synod from the consultant.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question from the microphone and a response and then test it, and because otherwise we will need to move on to other things. So, thank you from that microphone.
Thank you, Moderator. My name is Lisa Carey. I'm from the Presbytery of Yarra Yarra. I live, work and worship on the land of the Wurundjeri people, and my pronouns are she, her. I don't know if this is the right question in this proposal, and I think it would probably go into E. But one thing that we've done in the Presbytery of Yarra Yarra is we're building a couple of new townhouses in Kew, and we've made the decision to not have any gas connection. So it's a straight electricity. So I'm wondering whether there's some addition in here for the General Secretary to request property services. That I know we don't build many new things, but when we do, to actually walk the talk, to not have gas connected to new builds or big renovations. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some support for that. Can I test the room? If I was to put the whole proposal, how would you respond? Okay, we do not have consensus, but it's so close that it's actually worth just asking a little more. So, anyone holding a blue card, would you like to speak?
Moderator, I'm Andrea Mays. I'm the Wurundjeri land, Port Phillip East Presbytery. I'm pronouns she, her. I have great concerns that this proposal is greenwashing. The amount of money that is proposed, the 100,000, would only cover converting maybe 4 or 5 manses or churches from gas to electricity. It is token. We couldn't even get one building in each presbytery. To say we're taking climate action and then to nominate such a small amount is not being authentic. So I don't support this proposal. I think if we really want to show that we support justice for all creation, then we need to do more.
Thank you. I'm going to just take the comments for now, and then we might need to move to a facilitation process to see if we can move forward. Yep.
Moderator Craig Thompson. My concern is very similar to what was just expressed. That is, we have an initial funding of $100,000 and then the possibility that other institutions in the Synod which are already not able to afford this, for the most part I imagine, can contribute to the fund. So my concern is that it also doesn't really reflect what might constitute a strong response to climate change concerns. And the argument that our budget will not stretch to that is precisely the argument which is out there in the wider community when it comes to making changes along these sorts of lines. So my concern would be that this is not really enough, and that if it took us one more Synod cycle to work out how to make it better, that would the long term be more advantageous than to push it through at this stage.
Okay, thank you. There's not a lot of movement on cards for that. Could I suggest that anyone who wants to have a slightly further discussion about this, perhaps can we arrange for the proposers and a few interested parties to have a conversation together? We might see if someone from the facilitation team is able to assist with that. We must have facilitation group team here. Yes, there we go. Can you nominate someone to help facilitate a conversation? Thank you. Jay Robinson will facilitate a conversation which will General Secretary.
Moderator, could I suggest that anybody who's interested in discussing this matter further to find a way forward meets with Jay immediately at the close of business tonight to find a time tomorrow morning pre-session or during morning tea. It needs to be done fairly rapidly so we can have a revised proposal to be shared amongst all of the membership and so forth. So it's work which needs to be done. To find a time when that discussion can happen so that they can do some work on it, and then we can, if a way forward is found, we can bring it to the whole meeting. I do stress that the work needs to be done fairly quickly, and breakfast together tomorrow might be a good idea.
Thank you, General Secretary. Thank you for your attention to that business. We will now invite the facilitation group to provide us with some feedback about the Act 2 working group. So the facilitation group they're a team who have been working away all day. It's a great team of people, and we thank you for your work and look forward to what you can share with us. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for your appreciation, Moderator. Moderator Rachel Kronberger. I'm from the Presbytery of Yarra Yarra. I live on Wurundjeri land, and I'm here as convener of the facilitation group. The facilitation group has read all your feedback and responses to the Act 2 proposal. There are no graphics to show you, there's just me. So I'm going to tell you about what you said so that you can hear the voice of the Synod as a whole. There are no proposals to be brought. We did not have a unified view on this. The resources from your feedback will go both in their raw form, in the words that you submitted to working groups, and in this summarised form to the Act 2 team of the Assembly. We began with Work Stream 1 and Direction 1, which is to encourage local communities of discipleship and mission. Each group discussed this first direction. 15 groups were supportive, 4 were open, and 1 was cool. Groups affirmed the importance of equipping and training lay people, of team ministry and shared leadership in strengthening congregational vitality. Groups also affirmed the importance of building congregational connections and partnerships with agencies and schools. Questions we had were about smaller or older congregations, brand new congregations, and ecumenical settings. Rural, non-geographical, and culturally and linguistically diverse communities were also considered in your discussions. And terminology, theology, and specific details were still being looked for. When working groups discussed Direction 2, to align with the vision of congregations in the basis of union, 14 groups supported this, 6 groups were open. Groups said variously, and this is the whole range, the basis of union inspires movement, creates challenges, it highlights the centrality of the local congregation. It is important, it is in need of revisiting. It lifts us up and recognises smaller faith communities. It is in danger of being prioritised over the gospel. Questions raised by this focus on the basis and the congregation within it include, has the congregation model failed? Do we need a broader understanding or concept of congregations? Can we reduce the pressure of being overwhelmed by the regulations? How do we continue to value people? Concerns were expressed in this direction about requirements that draw attention away from worship, witness and service, and about faith community regulations. Members of Synod were looking for accessible and relevant language. Direction 3, support fit-for-purpose local governance arrangements. 13 groups supported this direction, 5 groups were open to it, and 1 group objected to the use of flowery language. Groups supported the proposal because it offers flexibility, encourages resource sharing, and reduces potentially onerous compliance requirements. One group said, we need to lift local leadership burdens and also maintain safe places, maintain consistency of the message of local groups, and maintain quality control. Direction 4 recognises there is a time for everything. This is the direction encouraging beginnings and endings. Group responses were 13 warm and 7 open, and this direction provoked longer emotional and thoughtful responses. The reality of external and internal changes to the church were noted, with one group saying, community is no longer geographical, and another saying, this is not a sign of failure, but of season. Still another said, it is an invitation to make space for the new thing God is opening for us. Groups asked about the locus of power in deciding about change. Who decides what is viable? Does this mean gently waiting for things to end, or is there room for stronger oversight? Some groups were concerned about increased top-down controls. We need to ensure there is oversight and support without forcing an outcome, one group said. There is a desire for support structures and transparent implementation and for clear inclusion of CALD communities and for people living with disabilities. Groups found a time to die harder to discuss than a time to be born. The letting go is very hard. Many realise it's time to change, but for some, I'd prefer that you did it after I'm gone. This can be a time for grief as well as celebration. Groups saw the need for the wider church to develop skills to help congregations end well and own their closures. It was noted that congregations are already exploring creative pathways. And now we come to work stream 3, which is the 4 options for the new structure. Option 1. In this option, 4 councils of the church are reduced to 3, the local, field and national councils. One group captured the mood of this discussion. Warmer than just open, but some questions around property and state legislation. 6 groups expressed clear support for this option, 11 groups were open and none were cool, and 1 group did not respond. Groups said this option would strengthen the national voice and identity of the Uniting Church. It would bring radical change to unsustainable governance and present opportunities for learning and growth. 2 groups commented on theological education, with one saying, theological colleges presently have some distinctive flavours. Would that be lost? Or could this be beneficial for the shaping of our theological languages and frameworks? There were questions about capacity, relationships, and resourcing. One group asked, where is the money and property held in this model, and who controls it? And another asked, can all of our state-based systems be integrated, and what would be the cost? The timeframe, cost, education, energy, people resources, and managing state-based legislation were all issues of concern. One group said, if it's too hard, it might not happen at all. And another, that change at this scale is unlikely to be achievable. One group expressed concern for CALD communities and the particular challenge of change for them. Option 2, being very patient. Option 2 has 4 councils, with a larger regional council and a much smaller national council. Of the 13 responses to this question, 1 group were in support, 4 were open, and 8 were unsupportive. There was a general affirmation for fewer layers of governance, but concerns included relationships between the councils, resourcing and personnel, especially given existing presbytery challenges, and that the very small National Council would be focused on national identity rather than a public voice, and that projects such as Act 2 would be more difficult to get off the ground. One group wondered if there needed to be steps built into a process like this, and another asked how the policies of regional councils might relate to each other. Option 3. This option includes 4 councils with larger national and area councils and with regional councils to administer property trusts. 1 group supported this option, 9 were open to it, 3 were cool, and 7 didn't respond. Issues raised included ensuring sufficient resourcing for the regional councils and the proximity and connections between the various councils in this option. For example, 1 group asked if discipline was too distant from the actual issues. And 1 group highlighted the value of a well-resourced team for a big national voice. We're nearly there. Option 4. This option has 4 councils, but with sharing of funds between the national and regional councils. 13 groups responded, 1 was supportive, 4 were open, and 8 were cool. The only affirmation for this proposal was that it involved minimal change. This made it doable, and it suited people who were already worn out. 3 people expressed concerns about maintaining the status quo, with 1 group saying we need to be brave in embracing a new future. 3 groups commented negatively on the financial aspects of this option, with 1 saying, already we don't have the resources we need. Moderator, overall, Act 2 was received by working groups with openness, thoughtfulness and energy, and we commend our feedback to the Act 2 team and to the Assembly. Members of Synod are reminded that Andrew Johnson and our President, Reverend Sharon Hollis, are here at the meeting and are happy to speak with you personally. They will receive this report, as I said. But if you didn't feel heard, or you would like in your working group, or you would like a chance to emphasise a point, the feedback forms on the Act 2 website are still live for another 10 days or so. Thank you.
We won't continue in further discussion about that because I know that you're all anxious to get to the theological reflector. And so we thank you for that. Thank you for the reminder of the invitation to continue to engage with Act 2 through responses in various ways. And so that will conclude that part of the report for tonight. Now, before we come to the theological reflector for tonight, I'm pleased to announce the results of ballot 2. And so everyone who was involved in ballot 2 was elected with well in excess of the required majority. So that means that Gareth Darlow was elected as Placements Committee Chairperson, and the following members were elected to the Property Trust: Mary Jane Crabtree, Helen Geard, Robert Hodges, David Rowe and Ken Tabart. So congratulations to all of those people. And I would like to invite Brooke to bring our reflection for today. Thank you.
We come together for theological reflection in community and on country. Last night we reflected on home, and in Acts 2 towards the end of the theological reflection we reflected on homes. And today I've still been reflecting on home, but home and heart. During the tribute service, we heard of evening pastoral care in the home. I realised in my 22 years of being a Christian and active in church communities, I have never received pastoral care in my home. And heart. Today, what I have practiced deep listening to has been with my heart. Yesterday, Aboriginal languages for heart, Takila, Dulu. Today, Tongan and Korean for heart. And in doing this, I learnt the limitations again of the English language, because there's not just one word. But in Tongan, loto, lotu, lotu, to give my heart. And in Korean, maum. And as I say about reconciliation, it's about having a go. Heart has been mentioned a few times today. Open your heart, heart to the path of righteousness. Every human heart will melt. Heart song, the statement from the heart. Today, there have also been many terms for God. And so, to start, I want us to each reflect on which of the terms speaks to your heart tonight. Tonight, you have the option to either close your eyes or keep them open. And so as you take that decision, which term resonates and will you take to the place you will sleep tonight? And so with eyes closed or eyes open, the terms for God mentioned today. God of creation, healer of hearts, Son of man, Lord of wisdom, God who saved them, Son of glory, enthroned deity, God in God's fullness, God as shepherd, God of all the earth, the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, God of glory, God of love, God from whom all blessings flow, Christ the King, God who has been our dwelling place in all generations. And we'll pause for a moment of silence and reflection. And if you have your eyes closed, open them. And as we continue with these words. With the deep listening with my heart, it has been a day of twos, a day of phrases, a day of questions that need responding to, and a reminder of unsettledness. Today I have been moved. Pretty much every session I have actually shed a tear or many tears. Firstly, to a thing that brings many to tears, numbers. Not where you thought I was going, was it? So the numbers first. And as I share these words, they actually are in the order of the day. So each time I reflect, it's in the order that they've appeared during the day. 2 bags, 3 years. 18 years old, 3 years, 2017. 653 minutes. World War II, 60s, 70s, 3 minutes, 2 days. 5th point, 6th point, proposal 7, 20 years, a generation, 4 to 5,000, 2019, 2016. 2 to 3 million, millions, 4 corners. 1,000 to 50,000 workers. Aged 16 to 40. 3 teenagers, 1 in 5 garments, 17 plus, 35%, 13 tonnes, 2 minutes, $30 million worth of US fashion imports, 50,000 tonnes every 5 years, $50,000, 0 emissions. $100,000, 15 years, 10 countries, 56%. D1, all generations, 1990. 2022, 2023, 2024, 50, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80. 29 dot points. D4, working group 2, 1 more. Ballot 2, 8 years, 5 and 6 year olds, number 10. And to places, other than the lands now called Victoria and the lands now called Tasmania, places we went today. Korea, Tonga, Mount Zion, Babylon, Ura, East Turkestan, Tibet, Mongolia, China, South Australia, Redcliffe and Gubbi Gubbi country, Uluru, Ananu country, Turrbal country, Meanjin, the place now called Brisbane, north of Maiwa, the Brisbane River, Parramatta, Darug country, and West Papua. We also had some animals with us today. Sheep, goats, lions, tigers, bears. But I went to 3 other animals not mentioned today, and I'll name them in a moment, but if you do not know the names of these animals and their stories, please take it as an action to find out. Animals that are the creation of the Creator, of God. The Bramble Cay Malamies, the black-throated finch, and the mutton birds. And I'm about to enter the Day of Twos, to share about the Day of Twos. And I'm about to do an activity, and to my friends who are running the video, this is the time for the activity. And so, the Day of Twos, one of the things that I've been reflecting on, it's hard to turn it off as an Aboriginal person, as an Aboriginal Christian leader, as a theologian, is around Western worldview and Indigenous worldview. And I guess I use those two as the entering of Day 2 and the Day of Twos. And so in the Indigenous worldview, when we look at society, and when you think about, all of us think about society, you have social, political, legal, economic, environmental, ecological, physical, and spiritual, to put a name on the different aspects of society. Our Aboriginal ways of being, doing, and knowing our Indigenous worldview is that those are all in harmony with each other. They are balanced, they are in rhythm with each other. One is not prioritised at the expense of the other. It's very different to a Western worldview. One of the examples I usually use when I share that with people is how many times economy and economic is prioritised over environmental. For 65,000 years, over 65,000 years, they were in harmony with each other. There is other ways of doing things. And if my friend here could do an example, this is some Indigenous theology. It originally came from Dr. Terry LeBlanc, and Uncle Pastor Dr. Ray Minnicon has used it as well, but it originally comes from his dear friend, Uncle Terry LeBlanc, Indigenous theologian. And we looked about looking at the past and looking at the future was one of our Days of Twos today. And so in the Western worldview, if my friend could stand up at that stage, don't walk yet, turn to me. Thank you. So you're standing there, the past is behind you. This is usually how the Western worldview works. And you walk in the present, but you're walking into the future facing forward. So walk to me, just to here. And you can stop there. Can you go back to the ramp for the AV people? Sorry, thank you. So just pretend you've walked up the ramp and you're there. And in the Indigenous worldview, how we walk in the present is we face this way, looking at the past, and we walk into the future like this. And what happens when Uncle Terry talked about this? I said to him, well, doesn't that mean that we clash and we collide? But we do this. Can you turn around? And as we stand here together, what Uncle Terry LeBlanc said is we learn to dance together. Thank you. And we have our terminology of walking together. And so the day of twos, left, right, sheep, goats, devil, angels, Old Testament, New Testament, decisions, fellowship, faithful futures, no future. Decline, dying, full, thriving. Judgment, consequences, beautiful, terrifying. Reward, punishment. Two paths, consequences for each. Private, in crowd. Nurse, textile industry. Economic, human misery. Gentleness, urgency, recognising, celebrating, incredible milestones, more recent, laughter, serious, uniting, united, steal both their futures and their joy now. Love, lack of love. Beginnings, endings, a time to die, a time to be born. And to the other phrases and words of the day, and I take us back to the morning. There was good morning, good morning, good morning. Morning has broken. Compassion, whisper, promise, mercy, goodness, comfort, wail, feeble, entrust, presence, illuminate, liberation, life, dualism, discerning, learning, sharing, deep gratitude, thankfulness, dedicate, deeply humbled, grateful. And then joyful, joyful, from everlasting to everlasting. Remember, reflect, tributes. Tremble, scare, imprisoned, trafficked, sanctioned, mind, produced, sent, slave, labour, doomed. Will not, will not, will not. Did not, did not, did not. All the nations, all the angels. Goodness, goodness, goodness. Brokenness, brokenness, brokenness. And to some of the other phrases, filled with compassion, time of trial. They told their stories. Looking back is natural. Historical anomaly, story of change, story of hope, treatment of the least of these, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, human rights abuses, environmental degradation, close to home, industrial espionage, wealthier, take action on climate change, climate pastoral care, climate anxiety and grief and crisis, communicate to our wider community and especially to our young people. Born, death, retired, new, ordained, service. Abiding in your love, pausing in your presence. Abiding in your life, God's children. Every remembrance of you. Your love may overflow more and more. Very truly, I tell you, this is the Spirit of truth. Light a candle, a cloud of witnesses. Consensus decision-making was born from us in every age. Values, directions and priorities, the greatest change. All of this is us dwelling in love, joy and hope, peace and contentment. And there are a few key questions that I picked up today. Imagine a future that shapes the present. What do we need to separate to see the suppressed and oppressed flourish? What are you doing for the beaten and naked by the side of the road, the homeless, those that need a cup of water? What is the most important conversation of the church? We went to the Bible, Isaiah 13, 6-13, Matthew 25, 31-46, Isaiah 6, Genesis 1, Philippians 1, 2-6 and 9-11, John 14, 12-17. And as I think about lens and language, we did talk about sheep today. Sheep naturally take me to colonisation and to settler. I mentioned unsettledness last night, and I mentioned it at the beginning of tonight. One of the terms that I have for Jesus is I call Jesus the great unsettler, with a capital U and a capital S, and it is a play on the word settler. Jesus, the great unsettler. But that's because Jesus unsettles me in heart, mind, and spirit each and every day. Not because I'm Aboriginal, but because that's how I know I'm walking in the good path. Jesus, the great unsettler, unsettles me in heart, mind, and spirit each and every day. And a reminder, don't assume you are the sheep. Yesterday, I shared the call of theologian and senior Aboriginal Christian leader, Uncle Reverend Graham Paulson, to read the Bible with Aboriginal eyes. Robin took us to Babylon, and so I went to Psalm 137, verses 1-4, and reading with Aboriginal eyes, I heard it this way, and these are my words. By the Birrawong of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong, the Maiwa of the Yuggera and Turrbal, the Darabin of the Durrig and Darawal, the Garawirapari of the Ghana, the Durbal Yirigang of the Noongar. There we sat down and there we wept when we remembered. For our captors asked us for our songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of those songs of yours in language. On the grass trees there, we hung up our clapsticks and didgeridoos. How could we sing the Creator's song in a foreign land? And I'll just pause for a moment of silence. And I went to Matthew 25, and reading with Aboriginal eyes, I heard it this way, and these are my words. For I had stolen wages, and you gave me flour and sugar to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing, but gave 65,000 years of fresh, clean water to your livestock to drink and damage. I was made a stranger when you moved in the name of colonisation, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you made Bennelong write a letter in English to Governor Phillip to request stockings, a handkerchief, and shoes, and was denied. I was sick and dying of diabetes 6 times more often than non-Aboriginal people, and in prison as a 10-year-old boy, being more likely to be in juvenile detention centre than to finish year 12, and you did not look after me. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And my term for God that speaks to my heart tonight, and in this day of twos with my eyes opened and eyes closed, and that I take to the place I will sleep tonight. And in that phrase, I'm trying to honour those who do not have a home and are the homeless in our society. My term for God comes from a self-declared privileged white woman, and it's this: the Son of Man whose broken brown-skinned body hangs on a cross. And I sing, metaphorically, in a Tongan song with the beat of the clapsticks. And the blessing I leave with you tonight, if we could all stand if you are able. My blessing in my words that I leave with you tonight is what I called an Aboriginal prayer for truth and hope. May the God of all wonder who set the stars in the sky bless you with relentless unsettledness that drives you to seek truth. May the God of all justice who gave motion to the rivers bless you with righteous anger that drives you to seek freedom for all. May the God of all love who placed laughter in the kookaburra bless you with the friendship that looks like the love where one lays down their life for another. May the God of all comfort, who determined the heights of the mountains, bless you with tears from shared pain and mourning that shows you hope. So now, with wonder, righteous anger, sacrifice and lament, go in truth, justice, love and hope. Amen.
Members of Synod, we will have a final word from the business convener, and then we will be going with that blessing.
Thank you, Moderator. It's time to announce tonight's winner of the Uniting Fire and Clay hamper. And I would like to assure members of the Synod that the draw is done under supervised and completely random conditions. However, once again, we have a winner on table 11. This time, Kathy Halliwell. So, Kathy, you can pick up your hamper from the business office, and we won't be moving anyone to table 11. No requests will be. I can tell you that the profiles for Assembly nominations are now available on the app, so some bedtime reading for you all. If you're interested in assisting with the discussion around Proposal 10, zero emissions, you need to meet near the ramp at the front of the stage at the end of this session. Meet with Jay Robinson. And if Al McRae, Rachel Kronberger and Jenny Batten could meet at the foot of the stairs at the end of this session, that would be helpful as well. I'd like to remind you all that tomorrow is Monday, and so you're probably aware, but just to keep in mind that travel times may be increased by Monday morning traffic, both on the roads and on public transport, and the car park is likely to be fuller as well. So please make time for that, and we will see you back here to start at 9 a.m.
Thank you, members of Synod. Good night, sleep well. We will see you in the morning. Thank you.